This is NEGOTIATEx TV.
Hey everyone, welcome to the NEGOTIATEx podcast. I am your co-host and co-founder, Nolan Martin. With me today is Aram, my co-host and co-founder, but more importantly, not that you aren't important, Aram, but more importantly, we have Gary Noesner joining us today. So I'll turn it right over to you, Aram, to introduce today's guest.
Thanks, Nolan. Today, folks, we have Gary Noesner, the retired chief of the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Unit. During a 30-year career in which significant focus was directed toward investigating Middle East hijackings in which American citizens were victimized, Gary spent 23 of those years as a hostage negotiator. He was heavily involved in numerous crisis incidents covering prison riots, right-wing militia standoffs, religious zealot sieges, terrorist embassy takeovers, airplane hijackings, and over 120 overseas kidnapping cases involving American citizens. Following his retirement from the FBI, he became a senior vice president with Control Risks, an international risk consultancy assisting clients in managing overseas kidnap incidents. In 2010, Gary wrote and published Stalling for Time, My Life as an FBI Hostage Negotiator, which discusses his FBI negotiation career. The 2018 Paramount Network TV event, Waco, is based in part on his book. Gary has appeared in numerous television documentaries and has been interviewed in Time, Forbes, The New Yorker, The Washington Post, New York Times, and many other media outlets. Now, in 2011, dating ourselves, Gary was a guest of mine at West Point. He made a tremendous impression on the cadets there, both with his stories and his ability to bring relevance to the topic of negotiation. And Gary, as I get ready to introduce you, I wanted to share this picture with everyone of the two of us 11 years ago. I'm not sure who's aged more, but boy, those were two good-looking guys back then.
Yeah, there were certainly younger guys, that's for sure. And,
So, Gary, listen, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you both, Nolan and Aram. And coming up to West Point was a great honor for me. I certainly hold the academies and those who serve the country in high regard. My son, mentioned it in my book, you might have seen, was a Navy SEAL, and so all that stuff is close to my heart. And so it was really quite, I was quite pleased to see that the military academy was devoting time and energy to teaching these communication skills to our future military leaders. There's a similarity in law enforcement. We spend an awful lot of time on firearms training, for example, and it's necessary, it's appropriate. I don't criticize it. Yeah. But in comparison to communication skills that you would use virtually nonstop in your career, we tend to spend relatively little time. Right. And, it's really a key for a law enforcement officer to learn how to deal with the public and gain their cooperation and avoid conflict. And these are important skills. Not everybody's good at it. Most people can improve their capabilities, but it takes a bit of work and dedication. I'm sure I was far better at it much later in my career than I was early in my career.
I can say the same thing. Yep.
And I also throw in on the humorous level, none of this stuff works at home, so don't even try it there.
Well, shoot, there goes one of our last questions. We're going to talk.
Well, we could take a run at it, but I'm not going to overpromise here.
Well, Gary, before we get started, I just thank you for that, and thank you for your service too. You coming up to West Point was the start of a long-term relationship now that the West Point Negotiation Project has been able to maintain with the FBI's hostage negotiation unit there. And it's, with training and guests and everything. So you were a big part of that, and cadets continue to be impacted because of your work. So thank you too.
You're welcome.
Gary, I just wish you were a year sooner so that I could have met you and gotten an opportunity to go to the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit before I had graduated. But it's all right. I guess we can't.
We'll have to make up for that now. Yeah. So.
Yeah, perfect. Well, as we kick this podcast off, Gary, the first question we kind of like to ask our guests is, where did you start to become a negotiator, both personally, professionally in your life, and what was kind of the key aspects to your development as a negotiator early on?
Yeah, pretty broad question. There was no negotiations in law enforcement when I joined the FBI. I wanted to be an FBI agent since I was probably 6 years old from watching a television show about it. And it just something about the job intrigued me. I wanted to do something challenging, interesting, prestigious. I wanted to make a difference. I didn't want an ordinary, less challenging career. Different strokes for different folks, but this is kind of what drew me. And then when I got in the FBI, there was this new and emerging discipline called hostage negotiations. And I have to give credit to the NYPD, that created this program. And they created it for reasons that we find pretty common in law enforcement. We don't make changes because somebody has a brilliant idea and we think we should look at it. We make changes because we get criticized for performance, either in the court of public opinion or in the court of law. And that's always been the motivating change. It's probably to some extent true with the military as well. Right. So New York came up with this concept, and the FBI recognized it very quickly as a really good idea. And because we're a nationally based organization and international to some extent, then much more so today, we were able to really devote a lot of time and effort and energy to researching this at a deeper level, to expanding the curriculum, to have a better understanding of human behavior in crisis. And slowly it evolved into this crisis negotiation program. And, I got involved in it. I'm one first generation. My training was in 1980, and it started probably in the FBI 76, 77, something like that. So I would say I'm second generation. But one of the big sea changes that occurred when I became a full-time negotiator in 1990 was, and I was heavily involved in this, is the realization that most of what law enforcement we're doing, we're not really pure hostage situations that entail quid pro quo bargaining, like in a kidnap or a hijacking or something, but rather emotionally driven situations with no clear goal, with the perpetrator holding a wife, a girlfriend, an employer that they're feuding with, a neighbor they're having a problem with, whatever it might be. And people get involved in these situations based on their lack of self-control and, a manifestation of an explosive anger. And so they're not really there to bargain. I'll give you a ham sandwich if you'll let your wife go. I mean, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
So we had to really copy quite heavily from the mental health community, the counseling community, and use what we call active listening skills. And they're widely understood and embraced throughout the counseling community and increasingly in law enforcement. When I introduced this into our curriculum, I think for the first time in a major way in 1990, I'd go around the country and probably, at the various negotiation conferences, no cop knew what I was talking about. Right. Now it's the bread and butter of negotiation. If you don't know active listening skills, you're simply not a negotiator, because that's how we create a relationship of trust. We're not looking for a long-term friendship. We're looking to diffuse, de-escalate, to project sincerity and genuineness, and say, I'm here to help you. I don't want to see you get hurt, and I don't want to see anybody in there get hurt. And we've learned when we do that, rather than using that confrontational law enforcement command voice, you better do this or we're going to come out and get you, the old Sergeant Friday kind of thing,
right?
That we accrue much better results, because people will become self-destructive and do things against their own best interests. And we have to be careful that we steer them away from that. And it takes a little bit of time. That's why I named my book Stalling for Time, because time is a key element. We're not purposely trying to elongate the situation, but we know that the passage of time tends to lower the emotional content and brings people to a point where they're a little bit more reasonable. That what suggestion you made 3 hours ago, which was rejected, might now seem more reasonable after the person's tired and hungry and frustrated and has maybe burned off some of their adrenaline, whatever it is. So that's the basic concept. Then we realize that those skill sets, and by the way, 90% of what law enforcement does is in this emotional spectrum, expressive incidents. But we found it also works in, more traditional hostage situations because, my view is everything in life is about relationship, everything. I guess if you live in a lighthouse out in the coast of Maine or something like that, you don't have to worry about, even they have to communicate with somebody, but most of us, at home, work, recreationally, we as human beings are tribal animals and we rely on cooperation. And that all stems from creating a good, positive relationship. And when that's missing, there's problems. And when it exists, we overcome problems. And, so that's the key feature. And if we can find ways to help negotiators in a short, compressed period of time, typically, to build those relationships of trust, then we stand a very high likelihood of achieving success.
So, Gary, in your book, you talk about kind of the FBI's path to developing negotiation as a critical skill for the agents in the organization. You also just mentioned, some of these public perception and opinion events that kind of drove. Can you share a little bit about what, those incidents that you talk about in the book that were the impetus for creating the crisis negotiation unit that you eventually would lead?
Well, New York had what really prompted them to start looking into this was a famous robbery at a sporting goods store, and a police officer was killed, and it was a mess. Different police officials were trying to negotiate, and it was disorganized, and they decided to create the emergency services unit, and it became quite a successful entity and a negotiation team. And with the FBI, it was the Dog Day Afternoon bank robbery, which was also in conjunction with NYPD. And we had a case in Jacksonville, Florida, a small airplane where, the FBI conducted pretty poor negotiations and shot out the tires, and the hijacker ended up killing the two victims and himself. And, we began to say, hey, we have to develop something better than just demanding people surrender and being confrontational. Right. And so that's kind of how that, and there was a court case. And like most things, as I mentioned earlier, when there's scrutiny of what you've done and questions asked about why you did it this way, it becomes hard to defend. In law enforcement, we have long embraced this philosophy that oftentimes we don't listen to tell you the truth. And that is, we use no more force than is absolutely necessary. And of course, these topics are very, very upfront these days, with right. The use of police force and so forth. And I think we have to think, when we take an action, we have to say, is this necessary now? Do we have to take this escalated physical action now? Or is it more prudent to engage a little further and to try to defuse? Right. There was a police department that I trained many years ago in Florida that made a very bizarre decision that they decided they were going to train every single person on this mid-sized police department in negotiation skills. The next year, their SWAT callouts reduced 75%. 75%. Oh. Now, what does that tell you? Instead of officers coming up, surrounding the house and, presenting a threat to this person, which I'm not saying that's not necessary sometimes. We have to keep the situation from spreading further and endangering other lives. But instead of Captain so-and-so saying you better come out, now you got, hey, I'm Gary with the police department. And can you tell me what's going on in there? We're concerned about you. You really stand a chance of resolving it peacefully. And what is most important, and what some of my fellow law enforcement officers continue to this day to forget, we negotiate not because of the victims and not because of the perpetrator. We negotiate to keep police officers alive. That's the only reason we do it. It's a damn good reason. No matter what happened in this house, we're not God. We didn't create this escalated domestic situation. We haven't shot somebody or threatening to kill somebody. But while we're here, we're going to do our best to resolve it peacefully. But to do that, needlessly to throw officers in harm's way is not the smartest way to do it. I think we have to be able to articulate to a court of law and a court of public opinion. All right, you went in this house and you ended up shooting and killing this guy. Right. Why? What compelled you to do so? What are the facts and circumstances? What did he say? What did he do? How did you gauge that the threat had increased? Because you've been there 6 hours. What was different from hour 4 to hour 6 when you went in? And if you can't, and I've seen many times where I've told chiefs and sheriffs and special agents in charge, if we can't make that argument, we ought to think very carefully about what we do. Sometimes we call it the action, not sometimes, we often call it the action imperative. There is law enforcement's paramilitary, just like, we're action oriented people. See a problem, fix the problem, move on to the next problem. But so when some less than satisfactory citizen is misbehaving, it pisses us off sometimes. Maybe you didn't understand. I told you to come out, and I don't have time for this crap, and you better come out or we're going to come in and get you. It becomes sort of a wrestling match of egos. And, the bottom line is, hey, we've got innocent lives in there. What's the rush? What's the cost? I mean, you look at some of the big tragedies like Waco, where I was involved, when, that has a perpetual black mark on the FBI because, there are some that question whether the FBI should have gone in at the end or not. Right. And, you've got to think about those things. You don't do it just because, well, we've been here 51 days and we're tired and we're angry. That doesn't cut it. You better be able to articulate for these 17 reasons. He said this, he did that. We've got to make a case. And I always told negotiators, when the boss at the scene says to you, you're the chief negotiator, how's it going? The wrong answer is, oh, it's going good or not so good. No. This is time to pull out your notes and from the team for these reasons, this is how we feel, support. And we created at Waco, which is widely used now in law enforcement, a thing called position papers, where, we put on paper for the on-scene commander. Here's our assessment of the situation. Here's our recommendations on what we do about it. And, it forces the negotiation team to put their thoughts on paper, and then it allows the on-scene commander and anybody back in, say, Washington that has to review that paperwork to fully understand what the negotiation team is assessing and analyzing. And, it makes the boss stop and think, because a lot of bosses are really good at being bosses in a general sense, but are they good at this? I mean, you could pull out from the Army, you could get the head finance officer for the entire Army, and you put him in Ukraine and say, now move the troops around and fight the battle. Well, it's not his element. Right. It's not his expertise. No fault of his own. He's not been prepared for that or trained for that or experienced in that. So, that happens with us sometimes because someone's a field general in the FBI. There is an assumption, or in police departments, that they know how to do all these things. That's and right. When in reality, they normally don't. Right. That's why they have to look to somebody like me and say, share with me your experience and knowledge. They're still the ultimate decision maker, but they're really foolish if they don't pay attention to those people in their under their control that have real expertise in these things.
Hey, thanks for checking out this video on NEGOTIATEx TV. If you found any value at all, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification icon if you want to be notified of future videos, and then we also have a couple videos over here that you might be interested in checking out. If you and your small business, your team, are looking to get negotiations or leadership training, then you can head over to NEGOTIATEx.com and learn more about the coaching services we offer. Thanks, and I'll see you over in the next video.